Welcome back to the Starbase Indy podcast, where we talk to and about people who are inspired by Star Trek or science fiction to work towards hopeful futures in the real world. Thank you for taking time to talk to me. And why don't we start by having you introduce yourself, although you are definitely someone who usually needs no introduction in these circles.
Even so, I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido. I have written a ridiculous number of books, or a number of ridiculous books, depending on which Amazon reviews you read.
Why not both?
That's true. Some of them have been in over 30 plus licensed universes, ranging from TV shows like Star Trek, Supernatural, and Farscape, to games like Resident Evil, World of Warcraft, and Dungeons and Dragons, to movies like Aliens, Cars, and Kung Fu Panda, to comic book characters like Spider-Man, Thor, and the X-Men, and to literary characters like Sherlock Holmes, Joe Ledger, and H. Rider Haggard's She Who Must Be Obeyed. I've also done plenty of work in universes of my own creation. The most recent is a new urban fantasy series that just came out from the Weird Tales Presents imprint of Blackstone Publishing. The series is called Supernatural Crimes Unit NYPD. The first book is called The Thin Blue Ley Line, and as I said, it's just been released. New series about a division of the NYPD that handles crimes involving magic and monsters. And I'm very pleased with this book. It is rapidly become one of my favorite of the 60 novels I have written, and I really
60?
hope that like it. Actually, the Supernatural Crimes Unit book is my 61st novel. So
yeah, that's impressive. So this is a different series than the one that starts with Unicorn Precinct.
The other one actually starts with Dragon Precinct. Unicorn Precinct is the second book. It's okay. The Dragon Precinct series is in an epic fantasy setting, so it's very Tolkien-esque, D&D-esque, sword and sorcery type stuff. This takes place in contemporary New York City.
Don't think of precinct as a word that I associate with Tolkien-esque.
And yet, but dragons and unicorns are, and the precinct is, it just means a section of the city,
sure.
of in this case of the city-state of Cliffsend, which is divided into 7 different precincts which is, just to make it easier to deal with the various bits of crime that happen. So
is it a blend of modern concepts, or is precinct one of those words like the name Tiffany that existed in
it takes place in a made-up fantasy setting anyway.
Okay.
Nobody's
It doesn't
actually
matter.
speaking English. Yeah, we're reading translations in any case. So, Precinct is, mainly the title Dragon Precinct and then the subsequent titles of Unicorn Precinct, Goblin Precinct, etc., are there to indicate the 2 genres at work.
Got it. Okay, that's very
Dragon
cool.
to indicate fantasy, Precinct to indicate cops.
So, and then your newest is urban fantasy also, urban fantasy also with cops.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it about cops that are fascinating to you?
I've made a career out of doing fantastical police procedurals. My first novel was a Spider-Man novel. For that matter, my first short story was a Spider-Man short story, and in both cases, he was working with the NYPD in the stories I was doing. There's something about, I've always been a fan of cop stories, in particular detective stories, whether, classical mysteries like Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple and Lord Peter Wimsey and such, but also, actual police detectives, trying to solve crimes and close cases and such. I grew up watching Hill Street Blues and Barney Miller, and then later Homicide, The Wire, The Shield, and so on. More recently, Bush and some others. And I've always enjoyed the investigative process, the interrogation process, the process of trying to figure out who did, how a crime was committed. And I like mixing that with the fantastical. There's a lot of day-to-day drudgery involved in police work, and mixing that with the out there elements of either a superhero story or a fantasy story or whatever is very appealing to me. In particular, is putting that particular chocolate with that particular peanut butter. I've done it in some of my tie-in fictions. Like I said, the Spider-Man stuff. Both my Spider-Man novels have him working with the NYPD. One of my Supernatural novels did that. One of my Buffy the Vampire Slayer novels did that to some extent. And I've done it with some other things as well. And then, of course, the Precinct books. Another one of my original series is called Super City Police Department, which is in a made-up city that is filled with superheroes. It's, the equivalent of the Metropolis Police Force or the Gotham City Police Force or whatever. And the nonsense they have to deal with. Because, being a cop in Metropolis or in Marvel's New York or Central City or wherever has got to be nightmarish.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that always appeals. I've only done, so far with that series, I've only done one novel and a bunch of short fiction. I want to do some more with it at some point. But SCU, the new one, is in a similar vein. It's, it's a unit that's specifically dedicated to dealing with magic and monsters. And the conceit is that they've always been around, but they've been sort of underground and hidden. And not very public. And what changed is a vampire killed a mayor's aide and was caught on camera. Solving that case, they formed a task force to solve that particular case because they needed a special unit. It was a mayor's aide, so there was a lot of political nonsense attached to it. And then they formed the unit because they finally had to admit that there are some crimes that were more Anne Rice than Ed McMahon. And so the unit was formed, and they're still kind of feeling their way around. And what's fun about it is, like, the reactions of people are very varied. Some people think it's all nonsense and that this is just a bullshit unit, Others think that, well, it's about damn time you guys figured this out. What the hell's wrong with you? And plenty of people who are like, yeah, fine, whatever, I'm late for work, which is about what you'd expect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the fun of it also, is the levels at which people are actually believe in it or deal with it or accept it. And on top of that, there's different investigative methods that need to be employed, different laws in some cases, which they're still feeling their way around. And they're still learning about things and figuring out what is real and what is bogus. I'm also trying very hard not to show the same diversity in the magic and the mystical creatures that you see in the city. The one of the main conflicts in the first book, which is called the Thin Blue Ley Line, is a bunch of Zoroastrian demons that a wizard wants to unleash on New York. The very first chapter has two of the detectives trying to arrest a domovoi, which is a shape changer from Russian mythology, and so on. There's Chinese, Japanese, Central American. Plus, there's vampires and werewolves and the usual stuff.
So just pretty much any fantastical creature that catches your fancy.
Yeah, and there's so many cool ones out there.
Right.
It's fun to dig into them and have them show up. Because there's plenty of fascinating folklore out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
you mentioned the different levels at which people believe in the fantastical, right? And it seems of late like that's a more current topic, right? That there's so much that people believe in at different rates. Does that part of why you worked that out in your novel, or am I just making stuff up?
No, that I deliberately make reference at different points in the book to two different subcultures that we have, in the real world, as it were. One is the BDSM community, the kink community. That's something that is very much its own thing. They not very public. Most of the people involved in that community are not public about it, and most of the people they know who aren't in the kink community have absolutely no idea that they're part of it. And it's not something that is in any way mainstream. And when it is mentioned in the mainstream, it's usually gotten completely wrong. And another one is, bizarrely, the scuba diving community, which is something I got exposed to during my first marriage. My first wife, Marina France, now she's a PhD in oceanography, but she started out scuba diving when we were still married. And that's an entire self-regulated subculture that they very, very strictly monitor their own things. They have their own internal rules. None of it is legally binding in any way, but it's all rules that everybody follows. And if you don't follow them, you won't be allowed to rent equipment or get a boat or anything like that. They're very, I don't want to say insular because that sounds insulting or bad. It's not. It's just they take care of their own because it can be a very dangerous hobby. And so it's very self-regulated. And to a degree that actually surprised me when Marina started getting involved in it. So those were two sort of paradigms that I threw into the book as a way of saying, yeah, this is what happens. This is a community. I mean, you had it in the LGBTQ community for a long time as well.
And still do to some degree.
Yeah, but nowhere near the same degree. I mean,
right.
I mean, I remember the 80s.
Yeah.
When the government tried to pretend AIDS didn't even exist. So that's kind of the idea. It's the same thing with a lot of the supernatural creatures and the people who use magic and such. It was an invisible culture up until comparatively recently. And now it's started to come out a bit more. And not all of them are happy about that either.
Yeah, what a great way to explore. And that's one of the things that you and I both love about science fiction. It lets us explore concepts that we wouldn't be able to turn over and look at the underside if we were doing in a real context the same way.
Exactly.
And that leads me to the foreword that you wrote for our anthology, because you mentioned what science fiction means to you and what it means to the world. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I mean, the fun thing about speculative fiction, whether it's fantasy or science fiction, and in this anthology in particular was science fiction, but it applies to fantasy as well, is we're not so much trying to predict the future because we usually get it wrong anyway. Just last week, I've been doing a rewatch of Babylon 5 for Reaction Magazine. And one of they were showing a news program, and it was one of those on this day in history things. And one of them was, Yuri Gagarin's space flight, and one of them was, something Bill Clinton did. And then there was the foundation laid for the first lunar colony in 2018, which probably seemed reasonable in 1997, not so much now. But that's not what we're trying to do. When we write science fiction, we're using the future to comment on the present in some way or other. Speculating about where we're going by way of examining where we are. And that's one of the great things about it. I mean, sometimes it's also fun to try to predict the future. I mean, Jules Verne was remarkably accurate in his prediction of how spaceflight would work, and that can be fun when you get it right, but that's not really the object either.
And there's a piece of it too that is imagining other futures,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
That the world as it is now is not the world of tomorrow. What are the variations of that we could play with, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's also fun to the world building is part of the fun, because you're the speculative fiction is the one genre in which the setting is not real, and you have to come up with it, whether it's speculating on how things will be 500 years from now, or you go through a wardrobe and you found a world that's ruled by a talking lion, or it's Seattle but there are vampires, whatever it is, or it's Seattle but aliens live there now. That's part of the fun is playing the what if game.
Yeah. So. And the interaction between how people will react when those things change. At Worldcon a couple of years ago, I think it was Charlie Strauss said the way you avoid having your stories be dated is you don't talk about the technology, you talk about how the people interact with the technology. Yeah. And I thought that was a really fascinating distinction.
Yeah. I mean, it's rough, especially with the way technology has altered over just in my lifetime. The communicators in Star Trek looked incredibly futuristic in 1966, and they look incredibly primitive now. It's like, all you can do is make phone calls. That's it.
My favorite are the fans who are like, well, why does the technology on Strange New Worlds look better than the technology on the original series? Because it's before. I'm just like,
yeah, the original
people.
If you take out the warp drive and the transporter, Kirk's Enterprise was less technologically advanced than my house. That's what they thought the future was going to look like in 1966, but it would look ridiculous now. So
right, yeah. So last time I interviewed you, we talked about your favorite Star Trek series, but there have been some new ones since then. So has that changed any of your opinions?
Well, DS9 remains my favorite, but Strange New Worlds is sort of coming up on the outside. There, as is Prodigy, actually. I really loved Prodigy, and I'm really pissed at how they mistreated it. I mean, we got 2 good seasons out of it, at least.
And I'm glad they were able to finish the second season, because they got canceled after is it called Shooting It if it's a cartoon? But
whatever. Yeah. Filmed, but they, and at least it told a complete story, which was good. But it was so wonderful. I mean, so much of what was planned for current Star Trek was messed up by the pandemic.
Yeah.
The original, and then more recently the 2 strikes as well kind of messed everything up. The original notion was the idea that they would have like a new Star Trek every week, but then especially after the strikes happened and Paramount decided everything must end after 5 years, which was not the plan. I mean, they were already going ahead with season 6 of Discovery when they found out that season 5 was going to be the last one, and they had to tack on that ending. Lower Decks was ready to keep going, and although
losing that one hurt. I mean, a lot of people really love Lower Decks.
And it took a while. Like it took me a while to warm to Lower Decks. I did not like it much at the beginning, but
why?
The show it couldn't make up its mind whether or not it was a Star Trek parody, a Star Trek comedy, or a 21st century office workplace comedy unconvincingly transposed to the 24th century. And it worked best when it was a Star Trek comedy. And as it went on, it did that more and more. There was way too, especially in the first season, there was way too much of Mariner being both horrible and right at the same time. And it got really tiresome because she was a badly screwed up character, which, was interesting in and of itself. But having her also always be successful and always be right really started getting grating after a while. And it was also it became a writer's crutch for the first season. For the second season, that they reduced that significantly, and it made a difference. And it became more of a Star Trek comedy, which is what it should have been all along. It worked best in that mode. And I also just, as it went on, I got to really give a damn about the characters, which has been the saving grace of even the worst Star Trek show, is that they've always given us characters to give a damn about, which,
Yeah.
yeah. So that, not necessarily all the characters, but there are characters who you find yourself caring about what happens to them, and wanting to see what happens next to them. And that happened on Lower Decks, and with our five core characters counting T'Lyn, and that worked out nicely. I'm sorry we're not getting more of it, though. And there
Yeah.
was no reason. And I mean, it was purely a financial decision, because after the strikes were over, the studio has to now account for how many viewers they have and actually pay for it. So now they're cutting everything off at 5 years, which was, not the hope. But Prodigy also was also what I was originally going to say about the pandemic. Prodigy was supposed to originally air on Nickelodeon, and then later be on Paramount Plus. But
Mhm.
when 2020 happened, Paramount Plus turned out to be a major source of kids programming to entertain these poor kids who were stuck at home. So they put Prodigy there, along with a bunch of other kids programming that they were doing at the same time. So that kind of messed that up. And then, of course, they thought having a tax write-off would make more sense than actually producing a TV show, which is a whole other rant. But
All kinds of crazy.
yeah, yeah, which is unfortunate. But in general, I love what Secret Hideout is doing. Even like just the approach that they're taking. I mean, is that they're willing to look at the entirety of the Star Trek universe. Anything is fair game, and I love that. I love that approach. I love the fact that they're willing to use the entire universe, whether it's the 32nd century or the 22nd century or the 24th or the 23rd, whatever. That's wonderful. And I hope that approach continues.
It's such an expansive universe after 60
Yeah,
years.
yeah, and yeah. You may as well take advantage.
Yeah. So you are deeply knowledgeable about all of the many of the geek fandoms.
Some more than others, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've written in 40 worlds, so you have to understand them to do that. Which is your favorite, and has that changed over the years as you do new projects?
It's tough to narrow it down to just one. Star Trek is certainly one, because I've been watching Star Trek literally since birth, and getting to write in Star Trek has been a great thrill. I've contributed both to the story of Star Trek through my fiction and the discourse about Star Trek through my nonfiction. And it's been great. I have yet to get tired of doing anything involved in that universe. But I have to give some credit to two others. One is Marvel Comics, which is also something I grew up reading. My first Spider-Man has always been my favorite superhero, and I'm very proud of the fact that my first short story and my first novel were both Spider-Man. I haven't gotten to write nearly as much in Marvel as I would like, but what I have done, I have absolutely loved. Yeah, I've done a few short stories, the 2 Spider-Man novels, a Thor trilogy, and it was all just fantastic. I also love that universe and getting to play in it. And the other one, just because of what I was able to do in it, would be Farscape. Farscape is one where I wrote one of the 3 tie-in novels. I did a couple short stories, and then when Boom Studios picked up the license to do comic books in 2008, they hired me to write the scripts for the comics based on plots by Rockne O'Bannon. So I got to work with Rockne, who created the show. Rockne and I already were familiar with each other. Rockne loved my novel, and I got to meet him at the Jim Henson Company through a publication party for the novel when it came out, and flew Rockne in for it. And the first thing he said to me was, "You get it," which was great. And that's another one that I love that setting. I love that universe that Rockne created, and that those actors and writers and the Henson Creature Shop all developed. And I got to basically continue the story. The comic books we did were, in essence, season 5 of the show. So that was just a wonderful experience. One of the most fulfilling experiences of my writing career was getting to do those comic books. So yeah, those 3 are probably the ones, I enjoy the most, just because of what I was able to do. And I was able to actually come back to Farscape a couple of years ago, or 1 year ago. In 2024 was the 25th anniversary of Farscape, and Boom put out a one-shot with some short stories in them, and I got to write one of them, and it was like visiting an old friend. It was great.
I love that world, and in a way, it is of its time. I think somebody who was 16 today wouldn't understand a lot of the original because it's so full of cultural references,
Yeah.
but
Honestly,
that makes me love it so much.
that was one of the biggest challenges writing the comic book, is
Yeah.
that I had to make sure Crichton's pop culture references all predated 1999, which was
Oh,
easy to do
sure.
in 1999, not so much in 2008, 10 years later. Like there were a couple of times where I had to stop. No, wait, that didn't exist yet. I can't have them referenced.
So you live in New York City, or
Yes.
Brooklyn, right?
No, the Bronx.
In the Bronx, sorry. I'm an Indiana girl. They all confuse me. They're all big
Yeah,
cities.
and they both begin with BRO, so yeah.
Right, yeah. So, and your latest series, it sounds like it's set in real life New York.
Yes.
How does being a New Yorker affect your writing?
Well, I like writing stories that take place here just because I love it here. It's a big, complicated, wonderful city. There's always something happening, and it is also possible if you need it to find nothing happening, and everything in between. There's every conceivable type of person here. There's every conceivable type of food here. There's every conceivable type of activity. There's just it's in many ways a microcosm of the entire world. And there's just so much energy here, and of every kind, and I love writing about it because there's so many possibilities. And so yeah, when I pitched SCU, it was, I wanted to have it take place here, partly because I know the city, I know it very well, and I like writing about it. And it's also, I've always had a tropism for diversity in my writing. I rarely default to the white male. And in fact, I generally go out of my way to avoid it just because I'm a cishet white male and I'm bored to tears with cishet white males at this point. And in particular, my own specific bugaboo has been trying to work in more Italian American and Jewish characters because we see very little of those. And especially Italian characters usually are comic relief or mobsters or both. And I am single-handedly trying to change that. But and just in general, I try to write a diversity of the same diversity in my fiction that I see when I walk down the street
Mhm.
here. And that's one of the things I also like about the city is just the sheer volume of types of people. In 2010, I worked for the U.S. Census Bureau for the decennial census that year.
Mhm.
And I was in charge of a crew, the people who come to your door and say, hey, you didn't fill out your form. Would you like to fill out your form? I was their
Mhm.
boss. And I had a crew. Every single person in that crew had a different lineage. I had people from who some of them either their heritage was or they themselves were born in Africa, in Puerto Rico, in Ireland, Jamaica, China, Trinidad, just, all over the place. Mexico, Cuba, in one case, just everybody, a ton of different racial backgrounds. And we all worked incredibly well together. It was a wonderful experience. And it was just, wonderful to see that. That's what this city is. The melting pot line is a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. Like I said, I try to reflect that in my work as well.
And I love that you talk about doing that because it's more interesting, not
Right.
for any other reason, but the world has such amazing variety in it
Yeah.
and
And
looking forward to
I'm trying to
explore.
reflect what I see. Like I said, what I see when I walk down the street. When I walk down the street, I don't just see a bunch of 6 foot tall white guys.
Now, did you grow up in New York?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have never lived anywhere else unless you count the 1 year I lived in Fairview, New Jersey when I was 2, which I don't really remember, and the 6 months I lived in Weehawken, New Jersey when my first marriage ended. But aside from that, I have lived in either the Bronx or Manhattan the entire time, mostly in the Bronx. For during when Maureen and I were married, we lived on the Upper West Side for a while. But at the time she was a computer programmer on Wall Street and I was a freelance writer. So guess who kept the Upper West Side apartment when we split up? I'll give you a hint, it wasn't the freelance writer.
Not the freelance writer? Okay. How weird. Hmm.
Yeah, hard to believe. But and then yeah, no, I moved back to the Bronx after that. But no, I love it. I love it here. I especially love living in the Bronx because it hasn't gentrified yet. Bits of it are starting to, and it scares me because I like the fact that people don't take the Bronx seriously because it keeps the rents down. But
Yeah, that makes sense. So, in addition to writing in all of these universes, you go to conventions in a bunch of different universes, I imagine.
yes.
So, which are your favorite fans?
Oh God, I don't think I can narrow it down. I mean, one of the reasons why I do like 20 conventions a year, ranging
Mhm.
from tiny little relaxicons to Jagunda media conventions and everything in the middle. And what I enjoy about it is that I get to meet people who are interested in the same sorts of things I'm interested in. And there isn't any one particular group I like. I mean, every fandom has its wonderful people and has its lunatic fringe. And I have dealt with the lunatic fringe of several fandoms, unfortunately. I have my share of hate mail. I mean, yeah, just to give an example, some of the absolute worst problems I've had have been with Supernatural fans, but also some of the best experiences I've had have been with Supernatural fans. None of them are a monolithic group. And
So, does any of the hate mail stand out in your mind as particularly amusing?
well, okay, in particular, in my supernatural novels, I love the fact that, and keep in mind that my supernatural novels came out during the second, third, and fifth seasons, so earlier in the show's run. I would see like reviews on Amazon where one review would say that I understood Dean perfectly but didn't get Sam at all, and the very next review would say I understood Sam perfectly and didn't get Dean at all in the same book. So, you know, especially early on, a lot of people had their own ideas of what these characters were like that was only occasionally based in what was actually on screen. And so that was kind of amusing. My absolute favorite, there was in one book I had Dean picking a lock. And somebody went online and said, well, this guy obviously never watched the show because Sam is the one who picks locks. To which my response was, A, what did Dean do when he came across a locked door when Sam was at Stanford? Did he just walk up to the door and say, oh, well, and leave? No. And secondly, after this review came out and such, a few weeks later, an episode of the show aired in which Dean picked a lock. I may have gloated about that online a little bit. But, and, you know, I mean, come on. You really think that John Winchester only taught one of his kids how to pick a lock? Yeah.
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 I wonder if the person who wrote that review was really mad about that episode. It feels like one
I
of those
don't know.
things that could spawn an internet
Mm-hmm.
thing. You're coming to Starbase Indy. You have been is it really only once?
Yeah. Yeah. In 2019, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, you
So,
know, there was a global pandemic and I never made
and
it back.
then yes, several things burned down in the meantime. So
Yes.
it's yeah, be a little different. But I'm curious what you remember, what you like about Starbase Indy, what you're looking forward to this year.
I like the fact, what I like about SBI is the same thing I like about two other conventions I do here on the East Coast, Farpoint and Shore Leave, which are media conventions that are fan run. They're not corporate, and they're not huge. And I
Pretty
like,
big.
oh, no,
PowerPoint especially.
Shore Leave's the bigger one. And yeah, surely, but even so, it's still not as big as, say, your Galaxy Cons or your New York Comic
Right.
Cons or your Dragon Cons. And that's, even though it's crowded, there's a certain level of intimacy that they have.
Oh
Even
yeah.
and I like that it feels more relaxed and a much friendlier atmosphere and a more casual atmosphere, which I really like.
Mhm.
And at least in 2019, SBI had the same thing.
And I'm going to take that as a big compliment that you would compare us to those cons because I heard about them for years and years and years, and I finally had a chance to go to both of
Yeah,
those conventions
I remember.
just a couple of years ago, like
Yeah,
2023.
yeah.
And uh, when you talk about it having the same feel, we were there, and I was looking at their program app, and there was a bug in it.
Ooh,
And they use the same system that we use. I showed it to my husband, who said, "I'll be back. I'm gonna go find ops," and went and helped them fix the bug.
nice.
And what I love about it was I walked into that convention, and that was the first one. That was Farpoint in, like, February,
Yeah,
and I did not know anybody. I mean, like, I knew you, but you were a guest, and I wasn't gonna see
yes.
you, and, like, I didn't know anybody, but also it felt like home, and I really love that because I have heard about those 2 conventions for years and years as being phenomenal. I really wanna know how they do what they do, but the magic
Part of it is
secrets.
just, you know, years of, I mean, both of them have been around for quite some time. And there's lots of people who like grew up going to Farpoint and Shore Leave and are now on the committee, you know, like they've
Right,
been
right.
literally going to the conventions for their entire lives. And they've generally been good about making sure that, you know, it isn't just the same people doing it every year, that newer, younger people come in
Mhm.
to work on it, which helps. But but you know, like I said, it's got the pizzazz that you expect from a media convention without um the cattle call mentality that you often see in a lot of the larger convention center based conventions. And I love those too. I mean, I love doing, you know, Indiana Comic Con and Galaxy Con and New York Comic Con and Dragon Con and all those. They also, you know, just having that many people together is, for some people it can be overwhelming, and I totally get that. For me, I thrive on that. I love just the sheer volume of stuff going on. Just because, I mean, you know, people say, well, you know, it's just a media con, there aren't any readers. There are tons of readers there.
Yes, there are. Yeah.
You know, it may be a smaller percentage of the attendees, but there's a lot of attendees there. Even, you know,
Mhm.
20% of that crowd is still going to be more than you usually get at your average literary convention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, especially with the younger audience, you know, the current generation of geeks is growing up where they don't think of any of this as there's not a single way they consume that they're their genre stuff. They read comic books, they read books, they watch TV shows, they watch movies, they watch TikTok videos, they watch, they read ebooks, whatever. They're not, there isn't really a divide between literary fandom and media fandom as much as there was, when I first started doing this in the 1990s, which is as it should be as far as I'm concerned. I think that's a much more sensible way of looking at it. There's no reason for a divide.
Yeah, and it feels like there's a lot more sort of crossover. Comic books are now movies, and TV shows I also have comic books and novels, and that feels like something that wasn't true in the 70s and 80s to the same extent.
They were there, but they weren't really taken seriously, and wasn't, I mean, that's been the main change I've seen in the tie-in market from when I started. And the process was already starting when I started writing tie-ins in the mid 90s. But you now have people producing these things who grew up reading tie-in novels, so they actually are more invested in what happens in them. When I started, you never would have had the executive producer of the show even know that they were tie-in novels or care. Now you do. When they brought back Heroes in 2015, miniseries Heroes Reborn, they also did a series of novellas, and the actual showrunner is the guy who approved our novellas, which rarely happens, partly because they just don't have time.
Yeah.
Although one of my supernatural novels, my second one, Bone Key, was actually approved by Eric Kripke because that was during the writer's strike in 2007. And because he was on strike, Kripke literally had nothing better to do.
He was looking for something to do, so thought he'd read a book.
He read the book, he liked the book, and then from that point forward, at least while he was showrunner, I don't know if that continued after he left the show, but while he was showrunner, it was his office who approved the books rather than the licensing department. It was his assistant who did it because he himself didn't have time, because being a showrunner for for a television series is a 39-hour a day, 9-day a week job,
Yeah.
It's not, that's usually why, even if they're aware of the tie-ins, they don't get directly involved. With Heroes, it was a miniseries, so there was a little more leeway for him.
You really get a different experience working with the people you work with in these universes than actors or folks who are writing scripts or other folks who are working on the show itself or on the movies itself. What's your favorite part about the little corner or angle that you get to take with these universes?
I try to find things that I can do that the source material can't. The biggest thing is internal point of view, because that's something prose can do that no other storytelling medium can, is you can get inside the characters' heads, and that's incredibly valuable. I remember actually reading somewhere, I forget where it was, somebody talking about how, he was really annoyed that he kept going into the innermost thoughts of the characters, because we don't see that on TV, so why should I see that in the tie-in fiction? And I'm like, dude, it's the whole point.
Yeah.
There's that, and there's certain, like, you're not restrained by budget when you're writing tie-in fiction, so there's things you can do that the show can't, like, you don't have to do a bottle episode when you're writing a novel. You don't have to limit the number of guest stars when you're writing a novel. I always talk about in my supernatural novels, on the show, they drove all over the country, but everywhere they went looked just like Vancouver.
Doesn't everywhere look like Vancouver?
In a novel, you are not limited by that. The novels, one of the things I tried to do in my fiction, and several of the other writers did as well, was embrace the location in a way the show could not, which is why I specifically had my 3 supernatural novels take place in New York City, Key West, Florida, and San Francisco. These are cities with very distinct identities that they would not have been able to recreate. And that was the point, because I could do that, in a way the show really couldn't, aside from that one episode where they went to Chicago and filmed in Chicago for a week. But that's the fun, is to try to find something that, for whatever reason, the show isn't really in a position to be able to do. Sometimes it's as simple as, coming up with more complex aliens than a Star Trek TV show has the budget to show. It's like I said, embracing the location like it did there. Sometimes it's just as simple as being able to get inside a character's head. I'll never forget, I edited a series of Marvel Comics based novels. The Spider-Man stuff I did was part of that. But I was also the editor in charge of that line. Somebody else edited my stories and novel, but it was the line in general was my responsibility. And I remember getting a letter from somebody complaining about one of our X-Men novels because Iceman froze somebody from the neck down in a block of ice. And I said, well, if you do that, they'll get hypothermia and die. And I said, Iceman's been doing that in the comic book since 1963, and now you're complaining? And they wrote back and said, oh, yeah, you're right. It just seemed more real in a novel, Which was funny.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And just, like I said, the chance to get inside the characters' heads to a degree that you can sort of do in comic books, but not as much, and you definitely can't do in TV or movies.
So now that is it Blue Ley Line? I'm sorry, I should
The
remember
Thin
the
Blue
name of.
Ley Line is the
Okay.
title.
Now that that's out, what's next? What are you working on now?
The next, well, I'm hoping there will be more SCU. That will depend on how well the first book does. The my contract is for one book with an option for two more if the first book is successful, which is
And
fine.
you'll be bringing those to Starbase.
Oh yeah. And the next one, the next novel I'm doing is another new series called The Inflictors, which is a superhero novel that takes place in New York City in 1977.
Oh, interesting.
It's very much a period piece. It's going to be published by Spare Room Press, which is a relatively new press run by Stone Sanchez, and I'm really looking forward to that. I'm having way too much fun with that. I have written stuff that takes place in the 70s in the past. That was when I grew up. I grew up
Hmm.
in New York in the 70s. I've written several stories that take place there, including one of my Buffy novels. I wrote a Buffy the Vampire
Hmm.
Slayer novel called Blackout, which focused on one of the previous Slayers, Nikki Wood. That was fun to just basically channel my childhood for all intents and
Hmm. Yeah,
I did a story for a shared world called Limbus Inc., which also a big chunk of it took place in New York in the 70s, and I've done it a few other times as well. And that was a fun time. I mean, it wasn't as much fun to live in because the city was kind of a mess at the time, but it's great fodder for storytelling. 77 in particular. I mean, there was the blackout that year, which had attendant rioting. The police were threatening to go on strike. You had the Son of Sam murders. There was garbage strike at one point. It was a brutal winter at the beginning of the year. The city was broke. Um, that was in the wake of the city requesting federal aid and President Ford refusing, which resulted in the incredibly famous Daily News headline: "Ford to New York, drop dead," and so on. So yeah, and the crime rate was through the roof. It was a much different time, but it's a great place to set a superhero story.
seems like what makes good setting for stories and what makes a good place to live are very different things.
Often, yes.
Yeah,
Not always. I would love to live in Key West, and it's a great place to have stories.
that's
And I've
fair.
written a lot of stories that take place there. I've
Hmm.
got Speaking of that, I've already completed. I'm just waiting for the publisher to actually, publish it. Is my second collection of Key West based urban fantasy short stories, which is called the first one was called Ragnarok and Roll: Tales of Cassie Zukov, Weirdness Magnet. The new one that should be out soon is called Ragnarok in a Hard Place: More Tales of Cassie Zukov, Weirdness Magnet, which has a bunch of stories that have appeared in various anthologies and magazines and such. And that'll be out hopefully soon. I've got a story coming out any day now in a Green Hornet and Cato anthology called Detroit Noir City. That was a bucket list item for me. I love the Green Hornet, and when I got that invite, I was thrilled. And I got to title the story "Everybody Was Kung Fu Fighting."
That's so perfect for you.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, the story involves martial arts because I'm also a fourth degree black belt. I've been doing martial arts for 21 years. So,
And
writing a
teaching for
Cato
many
focused
years
story.
too.
I'm sorry?
And teaching for many years as well, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah, I've been teaching for about 15 years. And that and so doing a martial arts based story was kind of inevitable,
This can't
and
be
I've
your
always
first
enjoyed
one,
it.
can it?
No, it was my first Green Hornet story.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. But not
That
the first
specifically.
story with martial
Oh
arts in
God,
it.
no, no.
Okay, I was like,
But it was the first time writing Cato and the Green Hornet, and that was fun. And that should be out soon. I'm currently working on a short story that will be out. There's a small steampunk convention that's held in the Northeast called Telltale Steampunk, and their shtick is to each year have an author who is the focus.
mm-hmm.
Previous conventions done Edgar Allan Poe, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and jointly Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker. That was last year. This coming year, they're going to be doing Lewis Carroll, and Eastbeck Books has put out an anthology to go with each convention every year. I didn't contribute to the Poe one, but I contributed to the Holmes one and the Stoker Shelley one, and I'm going to be doing a story for the Lewis Carroll one, which is called A Curiosity of Cats.
A good title.
Yes, I've got a story out in the current issue of Weird Tales, and believe it or not, I have stories in each of the next two issues of Weird Tales as well, which was not intentional. It just sort of happened. One of them is going to be the next one that comes out is going to be a Supernatural Crimes Unit story to tie into the series. It's actually a prequel to the novel. And then I've got another story, a steampunk story coming out after that as well, which will feature the same character that's going to be the lead in A Curiosity of Cats. And I have a third story featuring her that'll be in another anthology. Very soon now, there's going to be a Kickstarter campaign for the next Thrilling Adventure Yarns anthology, edited by Bob Greenberger, which is pulp-style stories. And I'm going to be writing a Ticonderoga Beck and the Stalwart Squad story for that, which is a sequel to the one I did for the last Thrilling Adventure Yarns. And probably some other stuff, too. I lose track. Oh, one other I want to mention. In 2021, I collaborated with Dr. Manish K. Batra on a serial killer novel called Animal, which was about a serial killer who targets people who harm animals. J.K. Woodward and I are currently putting together a 5-issue comic book miniseries adaptation of Animal, which will be published sometime in 2026 from Comic Mix.
Nice.
And there's probably other stuff too, but that I think that hits the high points. There will be more. My other original novel series, there will be more in those. There will be. I'm working also on a short story collection called Dragon Precinct Origins, which will have the backstories of each of the detective characters in the Dragon Precinct series. There will be another novel, Manticore Precinct. There will be a third Brom Gold book, and I'm supposed to be doing another Systema Paradoxa novella featuring a cryptid. So lots of stuff.
So you're a little bored, or?
Yes, indeed.
Because you also do the watch-alongs, and you write things up for that, and you've got the website and the blog, and
I'm still doing the Babylon 5 rewatch. I'm in season 4 right now, and once I'm done with the series, I'll be doing the movies, and I'll be doing Crusade as well. And that's every Monday on Reactor Magazine. I'm reviewing each new Star Trek show as it comes out, and I periodically revive the Great Superhero Movie rewatch because they keep making more of those. So I'll be from November to January of 2025. I will be covering Kraven the Hunter, Captain America: Brave New World, Thunderbolts, Superman, Fantastic Four, The Old Guard 2, and Red Sonja. I'll be writing up each of those individually to catch up on the superhero movies.
So lots
and at some point, I may possibly sleep.
It's more of your work for your fans. I know we have a lot of your fans in Indianapolis, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you at the convention in just a couple of weeks. So thank you so much for taking time to talk to me, and I'll see you on the Starbase.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to the Starbase Indy podcast. To find more information about our live event this November, check us out at starbaseindy.org or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. See you on the Starbase.